Psalm 77, and on Wednesday nights we usually focus on a psalm. We're working our way through, not all of the psalms, but last week we were in Psalm 73, and as I was deciding on where to go next as to which psalm to cover, Psalm 77, there are certain psalms that stick out to me as being very significant, which is very practical application to life. Psalm 73 is one of those. Psalm 77 is another one of those. And so let's read through the 20 verses of this psalm. It says, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and He gave ear unto me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever, and will He be favorable no more? Is His mercy clean gone forever? Doth His promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath He in anger shut up His tender mercies? Selah. And I said, This is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember Thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all Thy work and talk of Thy doings. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Thou art the God that doeth wonders. Thou hast declared Thy strength among the people. Thou hast with Thine arm redeemed Thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. The waters saw Thee, O God, the waters saw Thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of Thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, and Thy path in the great waters, and Thy footsteps are not known. Thou leddest Thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. What a great psalm. This psalm, really the theme, if I could just point out a theme of this or a practical help of this, is dealing with trouble and despair. Dealing with trouble and despair. Let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask Him to speak to us through His Word tonight. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank You for this wonderful portion of Your Word. And I pray that You would help us, and whether it's meaningful to someone here tonight in what they're going through now, or maybe it's something that will be helpful so much in the future, Lord. We just pray that You would do Your work, and may we apply it to our lives by Your grace and Your help. In Jesus' name, amen. Dealing with trouble and despair. What we have here is the psalmist starting here saying, I cried unto God with my voice. I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and He gave ear unto me. And so he's recognizing that God was listening to him. And really I see a similarity with what we looked at last week with Psalm 73, when he said, truly God is good to Israel, even to such as are of a clean heart. So it's kind of like starting the psalm with a little overview, a little summary. He cried out to God, and God gave ear to him. God listened to him. Because as you see through this psalm, the whole journey, the whole path he takes to get to that conclusion, when he then recounts what he went through, and that's what we see in Psalm 73 as well. It's a psalm of Asaph. And so he first starts out by crying out to God, but finding no comfort. Verse 2, in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. Now that's the right thing to do. Seek the Lord in the day of trouble. But what we're going to find here is that initially he did not find the comfort. He did not get the answer. But we'll see the whole path that he goes on here, what goes on in his heart and in his mind and his life. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. You know, when we're in trouble, we need to seek the Lord. So many people have trouble in their life, but do not seek the Lord. The best thing for a lost person, when they're in trouble, they need to recognize, you know what, I can't live life without God. I need Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not a proponent of guaranteeing to people, well, you know what, if you just trust Christ as your Savior, all your earthly problems will pass away. No, it's actually the opposite. You're still going to have problems. But the whole point is, they don't have to live life walking alone, spiritually speaking. They can know the Lord, and even in the midst of the challenges and the trials and the trouble, they have a comforter, they have a guide, they have a Savior. And so that's one of the great things of those who know the Lord, is that we actually have someone we can call upon. Someone beyond just another person. Because you know what? Depending on what the trouble is, other people are going to be limited in how they can help us. You know, the human help is not infinite. It's not unlimited. God's help, though, is always there, and it is unlimited. There can always be help no matter what we're going through. So seeking the Lord's right thing to do, but we see he's wounded with no relief. He says, my sore ran in the night. Now, the interesting thing about this word sore is that most of the time in the Old Testament is translated into the word hand. And so so it has to do with a hand or side, but most of the time it's hand or hands is the way it's used. Why sore? What sense does that make? Well, the next word is my sore ran in the night, and so you think of something being spread or running and spread out. And so there's some who would look at this as, and I think this is probably an accurate assessment, that it has to do, he's reaching out to the Lord. He's got his hand stretched out, so to speak, to the Lord. But why sore? Why sore? We don't know what kind of trouble he was in. We don't know whether it was a physical infirmity, if it was a spiritual issue, something going on in his heart and his life, discouragement, or whatever it is. We don't see specifically in this psalm what it is, but it's a sore. Why sore? Because there are those that get wounded. People get wounded. There are so many wounded people. So whether it's a physical wound, whether it's a spiritual wound, something in their hearts. And what happens is you get wounded, and the response of the believer should be to reach our hands out to the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. He's not finding any comfort. He's wounded. He's crying out to the Lord. He's reaching out to the Lord, whether it's his hand literally being reached out, or even just in his heart, he's reaching out to the Lord in his own heart. And so he's wounded, but he's got no relief. And the number of people who walk around wounded, I tend to think, is not decreasing, it's increasing. As each day goes by, as each year goes by, there are wounded people. All kinds of wounded people. And it's hard to go through life and not get hurt at certain times, but some people get hurt to such a great extent. They're just horrific things that happen to people that it's very hard to get past that. It's very hard to get past the hurt, the wounds. And what should we do when we do get wounded, we get hurt? Well, we followed the psalmist example. We reach out to the Lord. We call upon the Lord. We cry out to Him. But then he says, my soul refused to be comforted. This is interesting, is that he's dwelling so much on the hurt. There seems to be no relief, that he's not even receiving comfort. His soul refused to be comforted. How can this be? Isn't everybody who's hurt just looking for comfort? Well, I think a lot of people are. But there are sometimes people who are so wounded, they're so hurt, what they're going through, so much in trouble and despair, that even deep down inside of them, they're not even in a position where they want to receive that comfort. They're just so dwelling upon the hurt. I like what one commentator, Albert Barnes, says. He says, I resisted all the suggestions that came to my own mind that might have comforted me. My heart was so melancholy and downcast. My spirits were so crushed. My mind was so dark. I had become so morbid that I loved to cherish these thoughts. I chose to dwell on them. They had obtained possession of me, and I could not let them go. There was nothing that my own mind could suggest. There was nothing that occurred to me that would relieve the difficulty or restore peace to my soul. These sad and gloomy thoughts filled all my soul and left no room for thoughts of consolation and peace. And I really think that is an accurate description. That's why I read that. Whenever I read these, it's because I can't say it any better than it was already said. Well, that's exactly right. I was debating, should I use the word despair, depression? there's different words you can use, but that is absolutely. So if someone's I was thinking about dealing with trouble, despair, and depression, whatever words you want to fit in there but that's absolutely right. When someone is depressed, the weight of whatever the cares are, their troubles are, is so heavy that it takes a lot to get out from under those and actually receive the comfort. But we're going to see here the answer for how that is even possible. But yes, depression is a good word to describe here in this psalm for dealing with those that are depressed and what can be done about it. Speaking of depression, all of us have different weights that come on our lives. That's what depressed is pushed down. And we all have weights. But what happens is, if we don't know how to handle those weights, we don't know what to do with them, they pile up, and they push us down. That's what keeps people down there. That's where depression comes from. And I also heard it said, using D words, that disappointment, if not dealt with, can cause discouragement. Discouragement, then, if not dealt with, then leads to depression. And so discouragement is losing courage and not being willing to press on, and that's when people get stuck and they get pushed down and depressed. But his soul is refusing comfort. That's not a good place to be. He then says in verse 3, I remembered God and was troubled. That's not a good thing when God becomes a troubling thought. Thinking, where's God in all this? I'm thinking of God, but there's no peace now thinking about God. It's trouble. I'm troubled thinking about God. He says, I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. And then in verse 4, thou holdest mine eyes waking. So he can't sleep. People who, there are a lot of people who deal with anxiety and those things and depression and those similar things, that they have a hard time sleeping. They don't have enough peace at night where they can even settle down and go to sleep, because there's so much burdening them, so much on their minds, so much in their heart and life that they can't sleep. Then it says, I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. So even no words, could not even find the words. And that's what despair, that's what trouble, depression will do to people, is they oftentimes have trouble even finding the words. And they just bottle up. And they get, in certain ways, paralyzed inside. Those are all symptoms. You know what? I wonder how much money is spent on sleep medication. A lot of money. And yes, there are people who literally have medical issues that might hinder their sleep. That's understandable. But there are a lot of people who have trouble sleeping because they're just too anxious. They're depressed. There's too much burdening them at that point in time. So what do you do? Well, he then goes on to thinking back to the past. He says in verse 5, I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart. My spirit made diligent search. Now, thinking back to the past can be good or bad depending on the direction you go with it. Now, if you're thinking back to the past, thinking, boy, it was just so much better back then, and why can't I have this now? And boy, is there any hope for the future? So it's thinking back to the past with doubt about the future. That can be paralyzing as well. That can be a trouble. That can be a problem. And he says, I commune with my own heart. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. He's thinking, he's pondering. Communing with my own heart. That can be either dangerous or it's good to think at times. But if someone's thinking and their thoughts are not going in the right direction, not the right types of thoughts, that can then even solidify their depressed position or their position in despair. My spirit made diligent search. And then we have some questions here. Will the Lord cast off forever? And will He be favorable no more? Is His mercy clean gone forever? Doth His promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. And so those questions can be asked in a couple different ways. They can be asked in a serious sense, asking as far as doubt is concerned, doubting, is the Lord going to cast off forever? I mean, is this it? Will He be favorable no more? Is there no more favor coming from God? That they could be asked in that sincere way with doubt, really thinking, could this even happen? On the other hand, they can be asked in some ways in a rhetorical sense. Will the Lord cast off forever? Well, obviously no. Will He be favorable no more? Well, certainly not. That's certainly not true. He'll be favorable. Is His mercy clean gone forever? No, of course not. Doth His promise fail forevermore? No. Hath God forgotten to be gracious? No. Hath He in anger shut up His tender mercies? No. But Selah, He stops. There's a pause. He thinks about that. And in verse 10, he then gets honest with himself and recognizes the truth. He says, and I said, this is my infirmity. This is my infirmity. So in other words, he's not going to blame God for his trouble. He's not going to blame God or doubt God. He's not going to allow lies to set up in his mind that God is not gracious or that God is being mean to him or treating him unfairly, because that's where a lot of the battle is when it comes to anxiety and depression and despair. People have lies that set up in their mind then, especially when it comes to someone who does know God. Lies can set up in a person's mind about God. Lies can set up in a person's mind about others. And then lies can even set up in a person's mind about themselves. And so the enemy, the devil, specializes in lies and loves to keep people in bondage through lies. And that's why it's so significant here that he gets honest and recognizes the truth. He does not get stuck in lies, have lies setting up in his head or leaving lies there. He says, this is my infirmity. Takes it personally on himself. This is what I am dealing with. But I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. He's going to say, I'm not blaming God for this. I'm not going to doubt God in even going through this, because I'm going to remember how good He is. I'm going to remember His works of old. And this is a good way of remembering the past. That when you remember what God has done in the past, even when your present is not looking too good, it can give you some hope for the future. And so in verse 11 he says, I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. Now, I don't care who it is, any believer, any Christian can remember the works of the Lord. And somebody might say, I can't think of too many works of the Lord in my own life. Actual just knowing, wow, God came through for me here. Well, some people might have more than others they can think of. First of all, if a person's saved, they could thank the Lord for salvation. Jesus died on the cross for me and saved me from my sins. So, that's a good thing right there. But you know what? Even if a person's having a hard time, all right, what's God done for me? Maybe it's a person who's not been walking with the Lord. Maybe it's a person who's just growing and maturing in their faith a bit. They're very young in the faith. And what works would they remember? Well, we have a whole Bible full of God's works. We have a whole book to see what works of the Lord there were. But I tell you what, even for me, I can think of many times, even in my own life, I've seen the works of the Lord. So if I'm going through despair and depression and trouble or whatever it is, or maybe visiting discouragement. I don't live discouraged, but at times we visit discouragement. Hopefully you don't live there, dwell there. But it's a good thing then to think back. Wait a minute, what has God already done? So is all of a sudden He just not on the throne anymore? Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all thy work and talk of thy doing. So he's remembering, he's thinking about it, and then he says, and talk of thy doings. Talk to somebody. Talk to somebody about the Lord. Talk to somebody about what God has done. He says, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? Now, once again, I see a parallel here with Psalm 73. Because in Psalm 73, he was envious at the wicked. He was envious at the foolish and seeing the prosperity of the wicked. And so he's saying they don't have the problems I do. But then he says, verse 17, until I went into the sanctuary of God, then understood I therein. That time of closeness with the Lord, communing with the Lord in prayer and through His Word, he recognized, now I can see more clearly because I've spent that time with the Lord. And what God has reserved for in His sanctuary, in that closeness with Him, you don't see it from an earthly point of view. You have to see it from a spiritual point of view. He says, Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. That's, when you get close to God, that's when you understand His ways a bit more. Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared Thy strength among the people. Thou hast with Thine arm redeemed Thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, Selah. The waters saw Thee, O God. The waters saw Thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of Thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, and Thy path in the great waters, and Thy footsteps are not known. You know, one of the recurring themes I see come up in the Word of God, particularly even in the Psalms, is when someone's glorifying the Lord, and here in this case he's remembering the works of the Lord, oftentimes it goes back to God's hand in nature. That's very frequent in the Bible. That when the very first thing, when someone's thinking about God, they're thinking about what He does in nature, how powerful and majestic He is. And I love that. I just love that. Because when you think about God in that big of a way, that you've got a big God who can do all of that, well then God can certainly take care of what's going on in our lives. Yeah. I mean, that's nothing to Him. I mean, He's the God who has His way in the sea. He's the God who has His way in the heavens. He's the God who created everything. In verse 15, Thou hast with Thine arm redeemed Thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. And so He was the one who gave deliverance to a whole nation of Israel, and continued to deliver them. So time and time and time again, He was delivering the nation of Israel out of trouble. And so for us, we can think about deliverance in the sense of our salvation, being saved from our sins, that God still saves people. God has saved you and me. If you've trusted Jesus Christ as your Savior, you're saved. And then also we have a big God who's the God of all creation. And that is, I just love to think of God in those terms. I brought a book from the library a few weeks ago. I just renewed it. Haven't gotten, I've hardly scratched the surface. It's so involved. But it's the Encyclopedia of Weather, and they tack on climate change at the end. So it's Encyclopedia of Weather and Climate Change. Or Weather and Climate or something like that. I forget now exactly what it's titled. But it's an encyclopedia. And it's very well done, very well put together, and it takes a while to get through each page. That's why I've had to renew it, and I probably won't even get through when the renewal's up. But I mean, it is. There's so much. But I read that, and now of course the people writing it came from UC Berkeley, which is not a God-honoring institution by any stretch of the imagination. But you know what? It's put together very well. As long as I ignore the millions of years stuff and, that type of thing. I don't think there's even much of that in there. But just the detail, the illustrations, when I read that type of thing, that's one of the reasons I like it. Part of it's just an interest, but one of the reasons too is I love to look at how God has created the world and the systems to work. And I can't help but think just what a big God we have. And so maybe I'll go home tonight. If I have time, I'll go look at it tonight. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. Sometime I'll look at it. Don't have a lot of time to do that, but it's so good. And so God is the God of all creation. If God's the God of all creation, He's the almighty, majestic creator, then He can take care of our individual trouble. He can take care of our individual problems. He says, verse 19, Thy way is in the sea, and Thy path in the great waters, and Thy footsteps are not known. Thou leddest Thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So once again, reflecting back, what a great work God did And of course, his hand in creation was part of what brought them out of Egypt with the plagues. And he used men to do it. He used Moses and Aaron to lead them, humanly speaking, but it was God who was orchestrating all of those things. And so he's remembering just what wonderful things have taken place in the past. And that should then give us hope and confidence in the Lord for the future. That, you know what, whatever I'm going through right now, it's not too big for God. Just keep crying out to Him. Don't let lies set up in your mind. Don't live under that weight and under that despair, under those burdens, because that's what brings depression and it paralyzes. It has a paralyzing effect, so it will keep us from going forward. But let's follow the example here in dealing with trouble, despair, and then I'll add depression to that as well. You could maybe even add anxiety. All those things really tie together quite a bit. Because someone who's anxious all the time, they live anxious, is having a hard time living. Let's just say a believer who's anxious is having a hard time with their trust in the Lord, their confidence in Him. Now, of course, an unbeliever, someone who doesn't know the Lord, they have good reason to be anxious. But they need to get to know the Lord. And God can take care of their anxiety. But God can help us with these things. Certainly, you say, well, Christians should never deal with it. Well, Christians do deal with these things. And so this psalm is one of my favorite that gives us the practical help of how to deal with that when we deal with trouble. It's not that we're never going to deal with trouble. We're going to deal with trouble if we haven't already. I'm sure in our lives we have. And probably we'll deal with trouble in the future. But God has given us a way. He's there. Let's trust Him. Let's remember. Today's 9/11. A lot of people are remembering what happened 18 years ago. Remembering a bad work that took place. Now, there were also heroic works by first responders. But the overall thing was it was bad works by very wicked men, evil men. But what we can remember also then, what we should remember in addition to remembering that, commemorating this day, is also remembering for the thousands of years the great works of the Lord. Or dozens of years in our lives, or less than dozens if you're less than 12. But remembering what God's done in our lives and what He's done for millennia past. And that should give us hope and confidence and a good spirit and attitude for the future.
It's good to remember the past.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, don't live in the past.
No. Yep, that's exactly right. We don't live in the past, and that's why here in Psalm 77, he is considering the days of old, the years of ancient times, and that can go either way, either good or bad, because somebody can just get paralyzed and think back in the past and never move forward. But we can think in the past of what God has done, and that should give us confidence. What's God going to do in the future? How can God help me now? And then what can God do in the future?